Hello, Internet. Welcome to the third Chuck Chat. This one should be pretty quick. This is going to be Chuck Chat 3.1. It's going to be on Project 2025. Um, it's going to be 3.1 because I'm going to break it into a ton of sections. It is a very large document, and doing the whole thing all at once would be horrible for everyone involved. And one of the reasons I'm doing this one is because I've kind of wanted to read it for a while just to get an idea of what it is, and it is difficult to find ambition to get into it, and so I thought that this would hold me accountable and not only read it, but actually close read it, do some fact checking, do some research, look into what they're, sort of talking about, this and that. And not just sort of reading it like, some history class to write a 2-page essay or whatever. So hopefully this will help me kind of dig into it a little bit more. And again, this is for everyone, whatever side of the aisle. I think it's just a big document that we kind of talk about but don't necessarily explore that much. So we're going to explore it. And this first one is going to be the first 15 pages out of 922 pages, right? And so all this is going to be is an introduction, nice and quick, including a little brief history of the Heritage Foundation, which is the group that wrote Project 2025, and a couple of the individuals and what it says its mission statement is. And one thing I want to recall before moving forward is how much the current administration denied knowledge of, denied any affiliation with Project 2025, the document, as well as the Heritage Foundation. And so that'll be, I haven't read it yet, and so we get to find out about that. But the Heritage Foundation, we'll see, was big in the first Trump administration, and so whenever someone denies knowledge of something on whatever side, whether it's, Biden and his laptop, or Hillary and her emails, or Trump and his knowledge of basically everything, I'm always wondering, well, why would they want to separate themselves from that? And so there's always a reason, because if there's nothing to hide, you'd be like, yeah, those are my that's my document, those are my people. And so, we'll just get into it, and again, first dozen or so pages, and just kind of unpack an introduction to it. So let's see, it starts off with acknowledgements, names, and it posts an advisory board, which is over 50 organizations, and this was in 2023 it was published, and so that might have grown, that might have shrank, but I doubt it. And they all have obviously specific political, social, financial, etc. incentives to be on this board of this conservative think tank, which is what the Heritage Foundation technically is. It was formed in 1973 as a conservative movement, and gained traction, but really caught attention when it wrote the mandate for leadership for when Reagan was elected. They gave him this document. It had just over 2,000, I believe, policies, suggested policies. And very impressively, I think I read that something like around 60% of them were enacted within his first year of presidency. So similar, we're seeing a very active, hit the ground running situation. It seems like the Heritage Foundation writes these for every president, if not every single president, then at least every Republican president. And this organization is considered definitely the most influential conservative think tank, or political PAC, or whatever you want to consider it, and possibly one of the most influential organizations of its kind on both sides of the aisle. There's a chance that the Democrat liberal side doesn't even have something that has this much influence. very, very, very powerful influence. It is a nonprofit, as they always are, and both revenue and expenses of over $100 million, which doesn't even seem like a lot these days, which is sad. And and it's just interesting to note that during Trump's first run, he was heavily criticized by the Heritage Foundation and members inside of it for multiple things. One was non-conservative policies, and the other was a lot of flip-flopping, a lot of contradicting himself. And so this group was very vocal against him being the forerunning nominee. But once he was, as anything else, you're like, all right, well, this is the horse we're riding with. They started drafting, started influencing, and they got a very strong, hold of, again, just influence in this administration, in his first one. And there were actually, in Trump's first 4 years, 66 Heritage Foundation employees or previous employees or loyalists that were hired within his administration, including his chief of staff. So these guys, this group, this very specific group of Christian nationalist conservatives, were in the top ranks of Trump's first administration. So that's why even denying any sort of part of it, I'm like, well, it just doesn't quite sound right. And anyway, we'll be able to find more about that later. And so, a couple of the individuals that are named there, the forward is by Kevin Roberts, who I think is the president of the Heritage Foundation. And, I just looked him up briefly, and I would totally encourage anyone to look up the list of, the groups on the advisory board, the names on the acknowledgements, and any kind of names that I bring up, and see if you can find out more about them. This is only just some intro stuff. And so I guess he previously held a position with the Texas Public Policy Foundation, which is a much smaller but still very strong conservative think tank, obviously in Texas. And some of their primary donors included GEO, which is an investment group that invests in private prisons, as well as psychiatric facilities and institutions or whatever, and is currently involved in a huge amount of lawsuits, allegations ranging from bribery, corruption, physical abuse, including a class action at a youth detention center. So, and then two of their other top donors are, in Texas, are Chevron and ExxonMobil. So you kind of get an idea of, conservative think tanks. Think tank sounds like this cool thing, but really it's just people getting together and figuring out what their common goal is and how they can achieve these goals. And so you have donors that are running prisons that are under, going through allegations and running oil companies who want deregulation. You kind of have to ask yourself, well, what laws are they trying to pass? Who are they trying to protect? Et cetera, et cetera. And obviously on the same side too. I mean, if you're getting money from something like Planned Parenthood and you're against that, then you have to understand that like a liberal think tank might have, be trying to get these types of laws passed as well. So it's not anything crazy abnormal. I'm just, we're just looking at some background so that we know exactly what we're working with Heritage Foundation. It was edited by Paul Dans, who has a really interesting background too. So he's got a background in education and administration, and then into law. And so, he entered into, I think, this, and most previously he was defending Chevron in an oil spill case in Ecuador that displaced like 30,000 farmers and indigenous people, destroyed a huge swath of land, and they pulled out and didn't want to clean it up. And the courts ordered them to, he defended them, said, the other guys should have to do it, they're smaller partners or whatever. And the court said that they had to, brought it down to $9.5 billion that they had to pay out through this. And so the solution was Chevron, through legal counsel, right? Pull all of your assets out of Ecuador and no one can do anything about it. And that's what they did, and that's what happened. Pretty devastating. And so, so obviously we understand where this man Paul Dan's loyalty is, and even if it's not with, like specifically against Ecuadorians, it's certainly for money and for big business, and not in any way for the underrepresented or the underprivileged. And pretty brutally, he was named Trump's senior advisor for the Office of Community Planning and the Department of Housing and Urban Development, both of which are supposed to represent and champion the underrepresented, unspoken for, the underprivileged. And so just think about that juxtaposition, right? His specialty was learning how to basically skirt laws that, would help out people that he hurt, that his group that he was representing hurt. And then he became the head of those people. So it just seems like really not the best pick. Moving on, Project 2025 states, in the first few days of the presidency, that's where the most change can be enacted. And this is something that we've seen from before. And so that's why we see Trump hitting the ground running. It puts a lot of importance on having a plan well in advance, including a committed team. And that is not like Trump's first team. He fired everyone because basically when they would not follow through with an illegal or unconstitutional or even just unethical decision, up to including his vice president, Mike Pence. And so this time around, we're on the learning curve. He's had the Heritage Foundation and his own people kind of with an extra 4 to 8 years kind of figure out how to do this more properly. And so they've packed the cabinets and all the positions with people that will ideally not question whatever orders he gives out. And a good portion of these people are from Fox News, so they have no political background, policy-wise, or they have like a vague knowledge of reporting, but that's about it anyway. So they've never sworn in anything. They don't have to protect anyone. They don't have any background and stuff. So it's, he seems pretty insulated right now, which is very, very intentional, obviously. The language of Project 2025 opens up with talking about this government as being a Marxist behemoth government that is lashing out and targeting conservative victims and conservative ideals. And so again, we're seeing a Christian nationalist group that's painting itself as the victim because a couple policies that have probably nothing to do with them but rub their belief systems the wrong way, right? Most transgender people don't really want anything to do with Christian nationalists, but protective policies rub their belief systems the wrong way, so they believe that they're being victimized with this expansion of civil rights. It also goes on, and its very quick little thesis is a 4-pillar kind of point system, and we'll stop after that. And the first pillar is this 922-page document, right? The number one thing is this framework that we have for not just the first 100 days, not just the first year, but for the entire presidency, and then how to set things up for future presidencies. To make it easier for the conservatives to win, and B, easier for whoever's in power to enact whatever they're trying to, push through. And we're seeing a lot of things that we're trying to push through that constitutional judges and lawyers are saying they can't do, but this is what they're going to throw all the spaghetti at the wall, see what sticks, and everything that doesn't stick, they're going to wash it off and figure out another wall to try to throw it at. And that seems so far to kind of be working. So we have a lot to see in the future. The second pillar is the database of loyalists, and so in ramping up their preparation for the presidential transition, they created a list of thousands of names of people that they thought would be good choices. I'm sure rank them in terms of their loyalty, in terms of their experience, and where they thought they might make a good fit. And this would help with streamlining the appointments process, which traditionally I think probably takes much longer. And so the whole idea is like, we're going to have all the names right off the bat, and then Congress is going to have to keep up to pass and all this, that. The third one is presidential administration academies. And so this seems to be a series of brainwashing or indoctrinating videos that are kind of like, think of, like Scientology has these things, Mormonism has these things, everyone has these, even Christianity has these things where they're sort of like introductory videos like, hey, here's us as Heritage Foundation, these are our conservative ideals, if these are things that you believe in, then maybe you're one of us, maybe we have more in common or whatever. And then from there they will sort of gauge, I guess, where you're at. And this was an interesting one. It didn't have much about it, and it'd be, it was an interesting one. I guess they do in-person advanced training for those who seem like they might be open to or good options for leadership roles. And so it seems like a recruitment tool. And the fourth pillar is the playbook, which emphasizes immediate action upon inauguration, which is basically these three things summed up. Hit the ground running, have your names ready, have your list ready, have people in your, in tow, and already know what all your policies are going to be, and even potentially the order in which you sign them. They didn't print off all those executive orders, as they were coming through. Like, they had those ready. They had piles of Sharpies ready, right? But we also saw this with the Reagan administration, right? If he got 60% of over 2,000 policies enacted in the first year, he was moving very quickly. And so this is just their effective political strategy, and it's a good one. It's, like I said, I call it an effective strategy. And so right now what we're seeing is all of the executive orders, and an executive order is passed until it's not, right? And so a lot of them are, some are just silly, right? And then a handful of them are being questioned by courts, questioned by groups, questioned by individuals, et cetera, and so they're going 1,000 miles a minute, and everyone else has to constantly play catch up. And while they're playing catch up, they're still continuing forward on this kind of exponential little graph here, and getting a lot of things done that they probably know would take a long time if they tried the regular avenues, which is why they're doing what they're doing. And again, it's very effective. And a lot of things might go through that might take an extremely long time to reverse, or, and a lot of it might cause irreversible damage before it can be fixed, like the separation of families, which we've already seen, like the loss of a lot of capital or land, or the loss of studies, things that we've been gathering in weather and health and all this other stuff, trade partners, blah, blah, blah. Well, the future will tell. And so right now it's just hard to keep track of everything. And I'm sure as I go through each little tiny section of 2025, we're going to see a little bit of how it's already been enacted, and then possibly, hopefully, ideally, we'll be able to kind of, read the bones and see the future and see, all right, well, what is the ultimate goal? It's probably not come up with 1984 status, Soviet Russia, autocracy, blah, blah, blah. But there's a goal, and so the more we know about it, the more we know how successful they are, their strategies, the direction they're going, then, the more we can either brace for the impact or prepare ourselves to resist, legally in the courts, et cetera, et cetera. And I guess, we'll find out as the world turns. And that's all I got.